Hello and welcome to, I don't know what to say welcome to, because we have decided after my experiments with the daily podcasting and our experiments with the bi-monthly podcasting that from March, i.e. in about 3 weeks, we're going to start doing things a bit more regularly in a slightly different format. A few more interviews and big discussion topics and be a bit more structured, and we're going to make 2017 the year of the podcast.
So bigger and better
podcast.
then? Bigger and better?
I'm not sure about bigger, but better. Definitely.
Better, okay.
A bit slicker. You'll have more like undertitles, slipped into German then, undertitles and graphics and interviews, and hopefully the first one we'll kick off with, because I've got the interviews in progress, is some interviews with people who run tech cooperatives and startup cooperatives, which I find very interesting. But that's to come. So we're going to basically do a bit of a rounding off and have another kind of links show just to sort of clear out the closet a bit and have a fresh start for 2017. So Kate, what is the first topic you would like to discuss?
I have some good news actually. I'd like to talk about hackathons. I went to a hackathon recently. It was a women's hackathon looking at women's issues, and it was the rather oddly named Lady Problems Hackathon. You may have heard of it. It's a hackathon that's been around a lot of the major cities in different countries, from the Middle East to India to Europe to America, etc., Sydney. And basically the theme of it was to look at issues that affect women and women entrepreneurs, and it had sort of some subcategories. So it was looking at things like safety, health, education, entrepreneurship, or things that stop women from being, running their own businesses or being entrepreneurial. And Chris and I went along on the first day, and people were kind of, putting out some ideas, and I joined with another woman called Jessica, who brought along an idea for a product, and we decided to work on that product together. And the product, I'll tell you very sort of succinctly, I guess. It's basically...
I think we're all adults here.
Yeah. No, that wasn't the problem. It was just it would take a while to explain it. It's basically a camera for filming vaginas. The reason being that...
I think maybe inspecting is a better word than filming.
Yeah. Taking photographs, perhaps. The reason being that, it's one thing that marks us as women, being, of course, plenty of other things, but it's one part of our body we can't actually see unless you have spectacularly good dexterity. And whilst you could arguably use your phone, and you may recall, if you're sort of reading up on historical feminism of the 70s, there was a big movement of using mirrors and... as a means for women to see the intimate parts of their body. And, but the reality is that we haven't really extended past that idea of the mirror and the lamp or the light or the torch. So the idea was to make to push an idea of basically it would be a connected device. It would be able to be recorded. The photographs could be shared remotely, for example, with a gynecologist if you were in a remote setting. Could be used as a means to detect perhaps STDs, to look on the healing of stitches, or if someone had some kind of surgery, postpartum perhaps, or someone had been transgendered and had some reconstructive surgery there, something like that, or just women wanting to equate themselves with their bodies.
And interestingly, one of the things we discovered was that to make this work involved some quite cheap hardware, and in fact an element of the camera to the phone looks a bit like the arm of this mic's pop shield here. And you can actually get these cameras that can connect to Android phones for €5, and that's obviously consumer price, not. And they're mainly used for pipes and things like that. Actually, ironically,
drainage and filming drainage and things like that, looking for blockages. So the idea was, that we would work on an idea. And bear in mind, the two of us, Jessica and myself, we're not coders, we're not programmers, we're not engineers, we don't have any of those skills. If you asked us to make a program, we would not be able to do it. But we had an idea and we thought, well, we can pitch it the best we can. We can look at who the audience is. We can look at the rationale. We can look at the cost and the scalability and all those sorts of things. And we're able to do so. We pitched the idea amongst a group of other women. There's probably maybe 10 pitches. And surprisingly, we were quite flabbergasted to find that we won. So the prize is not, $1 million or anything like that.
What?
Sadly, there was no monetary prize. But being a freelancers, we were kind of like, oh. But prize is actually a mentoring, what would you call it, Chris? A incubator / accelerator program, something of that nature, that starts in March. It's a online program, so we're not entirely clear how that's going to work with people in different time zones and whether we'll get to engage, but we will, we'll see, and we'll certainly keep you on track with that, because we're not entirely sure what's going to happen and how. Definitely. But it shows that tech can be accessible to everyone. You don't. I think there's been a lot of work, particularly looking at hackathons, as how can we make them more accessible to different audiences and different participants. And I think this one demonstrated that we were able to make it. Yep. Make it accessible to us.
Bravo, well done. And as a witness to the pitches, I would say that yours was certainly the most interesting. Okay, my topic next is actually something that's been I've been working on the past couple of months, and I'm about to release the second part. In fact, you're going to see a lot more writing from me very soon. It's more of that maybe at the next episode, the first installment of the new season, shall we say. But first I just want to, I have been writing about slowly my switches from Mac OS to Windows and Linux. And I have the first part of my roundup with Windows. And I guess general summary, and I actually got to caveat this because the Linux article, which should come out next week or this week, or the same few days apart from when this episode is out, I caveat that by firstly saying that since my first use of Windows, I started installing the insider builds and found that actually there's been a lot of improvements to some of the problems I had. So a lot of the problems I was actually experiencing in this blog post got repaired, especially the working with dual screens and high resolution screens. But the one problem that still remains, which is my biggest issue with working with Windows, is developing on Windows in a cross-platform environment is just horrible. I spend so much time on workarounds and path names, and it's actually been very interesting because you realize how many people in the kind of area I develop in, sort of web technologies, open technologies, how many people assume everyone uses a Mac, not even Linux, a Mac. That's been really interesting, and I have seen a lot of more effort actually recently going into supporting other platforms better. I did a talk recently at FOSDEM. I did two talks, and one of them was about Electron, the kind of cross-platform framework for creating desktop applications in JavaScript, and they have gone leaps and bounds to actually make it better on Linux and Windows. So people are starting to notice again, I think, because Apple are starting to become a bit sterile and Microsoft are actually becoming more innovative. I think a lot of people are suddenly going, oh, hang on a minute, maybe we should actually make developing on Windows a better experience, but it's still a pain. And sort of in relation to that article, there was also an article from O'Reilly, interestingly, from Brian Jepson, and I'm not 100% sure who he is.
I know that name. Yeah.
Do you? No, I think you're thinking of the Jepson tests, maybe, which is something else.
No.
No? Okay, he is. I still don't know who he is. Who is he? He works for O'Reilly. Okay, that was not worth the wait. But anyway, so a lot of people said to me, but now Microsoft are injecting the Windows subsystem, injecting the Ubuntu Linux subsystem into Windows 10. Doesn't that solve your problems? Yes and no. It's actually a very interesting idea that you can run basically a kind of wrapped, it's sort of a virtual machine, but without the overhead of a virtual machine, a wrapped Ubuntu and SUSE Linux apparently as well now, inside of Windows. But the main problem with it is it still operates in very much a kind of its own world. And trying to access, say for example, I install Git in the Linux subsystem, and I want to then run that version of Git in a Windows program, it doesn't really work. And I get the feeling that those issues may be ironed out, but at the moment it's still not ideal. But there's this interesting article on O'Reilly from Brian Jepson about the journey to how Linux ended up in part of Windows. Or as the subtitle goes, from Linux is a cancer to Windows subsystem for Linux, which shows a real change in Microsoft generally. It's actually very interesting. So yeah, that's my first discussion. Back to you, Kate.
Yeah.
Well, unless you have anything to say on that topic, of course. So not sure if you do. No, okay.
Not quite my area.
Yeah.
Diabetes is perhaps the biggest growing area in terms of tech health. Or biotech health, however you want to term it, because statistically the numbers of people with diabetes or pre-diabetes, which again is the precursor, is growing in every country, and therefore VCs and people that predict the future. I'm not sure what that term is. What do you call those people?
Soothsayers.
Maybe. There is a term. It's like trend hunters. Like it's something like that.
No, I'm just being facetious.
They're basically saying, this is the biggest health crisis that's going to hit us, besides, I guess, obesity, and therefore they're looking at technical ways to solve it. And by that, I'll use a big caveat. What we're actually talking about is ways to diagnose, ways to manage it, treat it, not to cure it. We're not suggesting, that you can cure diabetes type 1. Type 2 has obviously got different analytics and different ways of treatment. What I did was, a few weeks ago, I sort of sat down and said, okay, I'm going to spend a couple of hours and do some research and actually work out where we're at, particularly in regard to using technology and wearable technology particularly. We'd seen recently that there's been a growth, and I'm just going to open my laptop so I can give you some terminology that's correct. Well, to start with, there's a significant growth in people that are creating apps for diabetes. So, apps that can be used to monitor diabetes.
That is a disturbing picture. It looks like a slug in your body.
Yeah, I quite liked it. I think it's a pancreas, actually.
Okay, all right.
Then we've got things like products that are used to check the glucose levels of the blood, like Dario's products. They have a little portable modular pinprick kind of glucose meter that enables you to check your glucose levels from your phone, and I'll put the picture up because it's a lot easier to. If you see the picture, you'll go, "Yeah, gotcha."
Is that cross-platform? Because I was actually just looking strangely for this podcast into microphones you can connect to a phone, and it seems that with a lot of these devices, and that is an iPhone in the screenshot, they don't work with Android, which is a shame.
I think this one's cross-platform, yeah.
Okay.
And they're an Israeli company, Dario. They do some really interesting work. But then you've got your connected glucose monitors, and
we saw one last night.
We did. We actually at a party and we saw someone wearing one, which is interesting. And the thing to say about a lot of this stuff is not only what is interesting is what tech's been able to do. Is that parallel at the same time, there's been a massive maker community of people that are actually looking at ways to manage. Monitor and so on, diabetes. People that have had the condition or their children or what have you long term are saying, well, they've actually used the hashtag on social media, we are not waiting, or we're tired of waiting, because they were tired of waiting for solutions that they felt were suitable for them. Despite the big buzz of diabetes, there's been only one connected to, I'll rephrase that, one diabetes connected device in 2015 that was approved, and 3 in 2016. And this gives you an idea, really, of how long this takes. It takes years to get this stuff through. And then we've got... So what was happening parallel to that was a big biohacking kind of community. And the open artificial pancreas system, the idea that we could use technology as a way that people could monitor their own glucose levels and whatever else they wanted to do. And the key people behind this have been Night Scout, and what they've done, I'm just looking at my notes here, was create not only the continuous glucose monitor but also a DIY transmitter and free and open source code so that people could use this. It could be shared on the cloud. People could compare their levels, and health consumers could work together on this kind of stuff. And I guess the logical conclusion of that, or the logical step, the next step that we're seeing, and this one won't surprise anyone, good old AI. No surprises there, machine learning, AI, and using that as a means to, get data from people's monitoring to be able to make predictive
Is there
assumptions.
much concern at this kind of being hijacked by insurance companies and things like that? Or
Look, the thing is that they already do it. I mean, it's not, this stuff is not new. There is, people are always like, if I monitor myself, it's going to be, stolen, or someone's going to do something with it. It's already happening. This stuff is not new.
This is not stealing. It's actually.
I'd also caveat that with, by the time it goes to, usually your third or fourth source, who's bought the data from someone else, it's anonymised as well. So, but look, I'm not trying to dismiss the issue. I think it is a significant issue. I have read about the sale of particularly medical records on the black market and written about it. It's actually quite scary.
To do what with? What would you buy them for?
They use the, if you've got, your ex-medical record says you have, I don't know, say a heart condition, they can use that and buy medical discount medical products or drugs cheaper because you need to have the thing.
Who would have thunk it?
So yeah, I'll put the link into that article too. It's certainly not my expert area, but it is interesting, and I've not So I guess what we're seeing now is that nexus between demand and what's available is getting closer. But again, the FDA kind of issues are coming as an issue, and I think the bigger issue there is one that a lot of people are thinking about. And bear in mind that, the kind of people we're talking about that are doing biohacking at this level are not people that have just jumped into it. These are people that research. They're thoughtful people. They read data. They read scientific journals. They talk to people. They're not just going, I'm going to do something to fuck up my body. There's a high level of analytic thought in this. Okay. And people are starting to go, well, is the way the FDA works wrong? Is there other ways we could do this? Are there better ways?
Okay.
Particularly for startups.
That's interesting. So we could even come into I don't think I've got any topics. Actually I do, but I haven't prepared anything. Maybe the next time when I've solidified the ideas a bit more. But I've been to quite a few blockchain and distributed, decentralized meetups the past month. And I mean, that could be a way of doing it.
Definitely.
But I hadn't really think to prepare any ideas around that, actually. But there's been quite a lot of interesting meetups here in Berlin recently that it might be worth actually taking that in a direction for a future episode. Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly, just in conclusion, it does cross over with a lot of other consumer products that are wearable products.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Next from me, I sometimes feel like we... maybe I should jump into two more bigger topics. Seeing as you just went down healthcare, maybe I should go into something bigger. So this is an interesting... First up, I'm actually going to put two topics together loosely. And on the subject of lots of data. So there's an interesting article on Motherboard, but it originally came from Das Magazin in German. And I have already been told by some Germans that the translation misses some detail, but still, it's an interesting article, but maybe take some of it with a pinch of salt, as they say. This is about the data used by largely the Trump and Brexit campaign and the company, Cambridge Analytica, yes, who have suddenly become very infamous in the space of less than a couple of years, gone from sort of nothing to suddenly on the voice of everyone's lips. Anyway, you know what I mean.
Yeah,
and this actually ties nicely, I think, in our last episode, or maybe I talked about one of my podcasts about the head of the digital campaign from the Clinton campaign, and just how in some respects they ran a very traditional campaign, as traditional as digital campaigning is, and actually the Cambridge Analytica works in a very different way and a little bit more insidious. I don't really go into much detail in my coverage here, but it's quite a long article that really does a lot of quite fascinating but slightly scary matching of data. None of it is necessarily rocket science. For example, here is a quote jumping out at me. Followers of Lady Gaga are probably extroverts, whilst those who liked philosophy tend to be introverts. I mean, that in itself is not... That's kind of from the University of stating the obvious. But the way that they then used these sets of data to target particular groups. So it was... in places. And one interesting thing a lot of people said about the Trump campaign was that they didn't even bother on some areas. It's just like the data showed them there was no point even trying. So let's focus more effort on the areas and topics that are going to win us the most mindset. And that was kind of the interesting thing about how they run the campaign. And despite sometimes the kind of the front person, i.e. Mr. Donald J, coming across as a bit of an idiot a lot of the time, he actually has a lot of smart people behind him with varying levels of ethical...
Can I just clarify something?
Yeah.
Just because I haven't read the article. So these were his election team collecting data for...
Well, they're actually consultants, and ironically, they're all British, which is kind of strange that a bunch of British people probably won the election for him. But, yeah.
And the aim was to use this to influence how people would vote, or to track how people would vote? Or
Sort of. It's not necessarily to influence, although it is slightly. It's more about... Well, actually, no, it is, but it's more about focusing on topics and especially areas where those certain topics are important to, and then, you know, you've seen how he does this, even now he's president, of banging on about a particular topic until you almost, like, you forget what facts used to be.
Right.
So, for example, one example I think in here somewhere, it was about... talking about cars made in America. They discovered that issue resonated very strongly with a particular group of disillusioned voters. So keep going on about it, and I suppose you are influencing their vote. Saying influencing the vote sounds very sinister, but this is actually quite simple, really. You are influencing their vote, but it's not in a sinister way. It is and it isn't, but anyway.
Well, you're determining people's priorities, and you're talking to them, aren't you?
Yeah.
So, I mean...
And the interesting thing is, actually, even with some of the people behind this, it's like that typical thing with academics, where they have an idea and go, isn't this great? And then other people kind of twist it, and then the academic kind of goes, oh, that's not what I expected to happen.
I mean, related to this, and maybe it's answered in the article, clarify me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is, with the exception of Michael Moore, all the people that projected the election outcome were wrong.
So this is the other interesting thing, is because there was a lot of criticism about recent elections and votes, saying that polling was generally wrong. And so a couple of things that get covered here is, one, it's a more different way of... Well, it's not polling. Polling is problematic. Firstly, because often people don't always say what they feel.
So what is polling? Is that asking people how they're going to vote?
Yeah. And people often, especially if it's a controversial issue or figure, will often say the things that they expect is like what you want them to say.
Right.
And also they've found that there's a lot of difference between the quality of data on internet voting and internet polling and phone polling.
Right.
This isn't polling. This is actually just using data that's already available.
Okay.
And that's the difference.
Right.
I think polling is flawed. Data is not flawed. Data, in fact, is... Yeah. But anyway, and we've also seen a lot of sort of tech outcry against various things that Trump's been up to, but it's also interesting to see that tech is on all sides. And it's a very interesting article, and actually now the company, this is probably more worrying, the company is now receiving inquiries from Switzerland, Germany and Australia. And I suppose so far, so one of its board members is Steve Bannon, who is, but also I don't know, business is business to some people, no matter how they manifest it. But, I mean, I don't know who is employing them in Germany and Switzerland, but I get the impression that any kind of consultant, especially in this field, is not necessarily politically motivated. I think they're just money motivated, and they'll go to the highest bidder. And if they happen to also win a campaign for a different kind of political group, then I don't think they care. And it would be interesting to see if it could work from a different side of politics. But so just sort of feeding into that, one other thing I want to cover, because there's a lot of data being collected on us and things like that right now, and a lot of it is down to these sort of very verbose, complex terms of use policies that we know no one reads and no one pays any attention to, apart from the sorts of people who care about that kind of thing. And that's half the problem, that we're agreeing to lots of things without actually realising what we're agreeing to. And this is from about a month ago now, and I would actually really like to follow up with this post to see if they've done any others. But this is a lawyer who rewrote the Instagram terms of use in plain English. So kids, and I had a lot of people reply to me saying not just valuable to kids, would know their privacy rights. And he's actually written it, She rewrote the terms of use in ways that a lot of people would understand, and it kind of more summarised, I suppose.
Interesting. Just if you scroll up, it says, and I'll read it out just for clarity, members of Generation Z or Z can spend up to 9 hours a day sharing photos on Instagram, consuming content on YouTube, and talking to friends on Snapchat. Just don't ask them to get excited about Facebook. 9 hours, wow.
Yeah.
When you consider they're at school, like how many hours a day? 6, 7?
Well, they're probably doing it whilst they're at school. But so anyway, I'd like to actually see what else they have written up, because it's an important. I think it's one of these, the education on, not like there's a lot of focus at the moment on education for coding, but I actually think like digital citizenship or citizenry, however you want to describe it, is another important issue. Like what happens to your data and things like that. And I am not casting any judgment on whether I agree with how these companies operate, because frankly, personally, I understand some of these issues and they don't bother me personally. Right. But I understand what's going on. And there's a lot of people
and
who
you
don't.
Understand why it bothers some people.
No, well, yes, I do. But what I'm saying is more that there's a lot of people who are not even aware, and I think that should be educated better in schools too.
Interesting. Can I give you a little anecdote there?
Sure.
I'll be very brief. I saw something recently where a mother was talking about how her son, she picked up her son's phone and it had some explicit photos from presumably his younger girlfriend. And the girlfriend was 14, 15 and he was 16. And by law, and there may be some exceptions in some countries, but by law in Australia where this happened, that's actually child pornography because it's of the ages. And then it became, her talking about it and saying, hey, this issue, it's my family too. This is happening all the time. It's not just over there in America. People were saying, well, actually, the fact that you had his phone in your possession and you knew about it, you were condoning it by law. Like it becomes this really where people, you could take this further legally. Yep. But of course, there was no evil intent there. The intent was to raise the issue and the bigger issue about, and that's why it makes me think of it, the terms and conditions that people don't understand. If you sit, I wonder if young people get taught at school or somewhere.
I don't think so.
That is actually technically child pornography, and you can be on the sex offenders registry.
Yeah, I mean these are not new issues. Just it's much easier to find out about them these days. Anyway, what's your next topic of discussion, Kate?
I've forgotten.
Well, open up your list.
Let me have a look on my little list. I think my next topic is just a quick one, which is just an interesting little piece of information I came across. Maybe you jump to your next one while I get it up, Chris.
Okay. I would like to talk about failure next.
Okay.
Firstly, and I found this very interesting, and this has been around the internet a little bit in certain communities, RethinkDB, darlings of the NoSQL distributed database world a couple of years ago, seemingly being used everywhere. suddenly closed down. They closed down their business side anyway. And one of the founders wrote a very interesting post on why they failed. And in a follow-up of good news, the core product has now become an Apache project, which sort of guarantees it a certain level of stewardship, which is good.
Okay.
But it's a very interesting article, and I worked for an open source database company as well, and a lot of this was very familiar to me, covering topics of why they failed. Things like market fit, competing, I guess a time immemorial anecdote on competing with bigger players, like in this case Oracle and MongoDB, who are not necessarily better than you. In fact, technically they're often worse than you, but it doesn't matter, and just how important that is. Metrics. What to measure with metrics, especially in terms of open source software, because, hey, we've got 5 million downloads, but in terms of a software product where people don't have to pay for it, so what?
So it's free, okay.
Yeah, well, it was typical kind of open source commercialization. Then kind of looking also at a really interesting topic about comparing company sizes versus revenue, and sort of just comparing, often when a project is successful, people just instantly think, oh, you're successful, you've got 20 staff, like you must be raking it in, and it's actually not always true. And they do some very interesting comparisons of them compared to companies like Red Hat and Oracle.
Oh yeah.
And then just other meta questions about why they decided what they did. And yeah, it's a really interesting article actually. If you've ever considered starting an open source developer tool and trying to monetize it, or, and possibly even more relevant to you, you've ever criticized how one that you like is run, I recommend you read this article because it will explain quite a lot to you. And just on the other subject of failure, a very different topic, and just because I liked it, and I find it, because I'd never watched it, I find it very hard to separate the reality from the lie here. But this is an article on Medium from Cards Against Humanity about their Super Bowl ad and why it failed. And I'm confused by this because I didn't watch the Super Bowl, and I'm not entirely sure if they had an ad and it failed, and why would it not? Or did they never had an ad? They never had an ad in the first place, and they wrote an article about how. And I'm so confused by what actually is reality. But I think this was the point. The whole point was this fake news thing.
Right.
So it doesn't matter if there was an ad or not, because that was kind of their point anyway. But it's, in some respects, like the Rethink article was a deadly serious article about how they failed and why. And then this one is just a very funny one about how they failed and why. And there's some great snippets like overconfidence in the model. So that basically the ad was a potato.
With some words on it? What did the words say?
We'll come to that. And so first, like the overconfidence of the model. So they hired an agency to look into what America likes, and potatoes are well liked. And so they decided to go with the potato. And then, of course, the follow-up to that is it has absolutely nothing to do with the product.
So it's almost a how not to. For Super
well, yes and no, not really.
And how much do people spend on this?
Well, it depends. And then it's like, we didn't add music. And our concepts for the ad, we imagined cool music like the Rolling Stones. Unfortunately, we spent all our money buying an ad spot and couldn't afford the $1.5 million licensing fee for Sympathy for the Devil. We forgot to mention our product. And what did you just say? Oh, because then they said it wasn't clear enough, so we wrote advertisement on the potato and things like that. And I'm still not 100% sure what the actual truth in this is or not.
That's actually pretty funny.
But one thing I've always loved about Cards Against Humanity is whatever you think about the game, and if you've never heard of it, it's an offensive party game, and hardcore gamers hate it because it's just dumb. Whatever you think about the game, the company are masters at free or cheap or marketing, and they've done some wonderful things in the past, and this is a great post to have a read of. So, did you find your final topic to discuss, Kate?
I did, yeah, sorry about that. I got a bit excited and forgot.
Got excited by potatoes.
Clearly. This is actually, it's kind of related, ironically.
Okay.
But it's actually quite funny. Well, I thought it was funny. There was a big kind of like, a big hype moment where people said, oh, there's this launch happening in Lisbon for this new AI company called Rocket AI. And it's like this big company and Some of the people attending were like people from Google DeepMind, OpenAI, Facebook, AI Research, Google Brain, Stanford, MIT, like big kind of people involved in the scene. And it was to the extent that there was a speaker, there were people, very learned people in the deep science side of it. There was speakers, there was all sorts of things. And as a consequence, people were tweeting about this event. People were, hashtags and all sorts of things going on. And it turned out...
Oh, I went to that building where it happened.
Okay.
Scroll up, that's where I went to the party for the homebrew thing, actually.
You went to a homebrew party?
I know, which was equally...
Well, that's interesting. Okay, it turned out that the actual company, which was called Rocket AI, as I said, never actually existed.
Yeah, I remember
and
this,
just to give you the run-in, I'll read this bit out, and of course we'll have the link so you can read at your leisure.
Yeah.
Email to RSVPs to party, 316. As a consequence, 46 people emailed in their resumes. They had 5 large name brand VCs contacting them about funding. The event was covered in Twitter, Facebook, Hacker News, Reddit, Quora, Medium, etc. They spent a mere 8 hours actually planning this event. They spent $79 on a domain, $417 on alcohol and snacks.
And a police fine.
And out of this, like if you base the metrics on engagement and, potential funding, the value is, tens of millions. And the product never existed.
So this is actually very closely related to the whole Gregarious Mammal thing. And this is not an original way of doing things. Like there's a classic story of a band, I think Brinsley Schwarz or something like that, who are on Stiff Records. They have a couple of famous members who went on to do other things, but it was the same... They booked out Madison Square Gardens and the band never existed. And it was just a big hype thing. But so the interest, it does, so when you say the product never existed, does it now, or was it just literally just to kind of show up?
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is the thing. I mean, I get probably a minimum, it's not that many yet, but maybe 20 emails a week, pitches about AI stuff. And most of it, I've got either the company's in stealth mode, so it tells you very little, or I've got no idea what they're talking about. It's and I do read things, but it's so inaccessible sometimes, or the actual what it's measuring, or how it's measuring, or the purpose of it is so kind of either single issue or niche or not terribly relevant to a lot of people. You kind of go, really?
Okay, Kate, this has been a nice episode, a nice wrapping up episode.
Yeah.
As I said, we're going to move on to a slightly different format in the future, and I'm going to be back doing some more writing soon. So we'll be kind of probably going back and forth a bit more about stuff we've written about. So just as a quick wrap up, any articles you've written that you want to quickly mention, or anything you want to say about places you're going to or working on or meeting over the next few weeks?
Yep, a couple of things. Firstly, you probably know I've been working with NextPack, which is a smartphone and smart device company working on modular solutions, where they're basically putting modular cases on the back of smartphones and iPads and things like that can do a range of sort of connected device functions, from monitoring air quality to breathalyzer tests to all sorts of stuff. They're actually finally, in the next few weeks, getting their first batch to their Kickstarter funders, which has been a long time coming. It's been quite a difficult product to manufacture, and I'm sure they'll be telling us more about that as
so
it
will
unfolds.
you, I'm sure.
Yeah. And my next big trip is actually to Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. I'll be talking with lots of people there, both the big companies and some startups, and please feel free to reach out if you want to have a chat there. I'll look forward to it, to talking to people.
From me, so just 2 other articles I wrote. I did automating screenshots and documentation for CodeShip. You can find the link on my blog on CodeShip. I also did an article for SitePoint on Java free Android, other native coding solutions for Android that aren't Java. And likewise, I will also be in Barcelona for Mobile World Congress at the same time, if you want to reach out to me. And then I have quite a few speaking slots coming up in the near future, and I'll mention at least the next couple of weeks, just because we might get ahead. So firstly, I'm going to be talking again my increasingly infamous documentation crash course for developers at PyCon, so Python conference in Slovakia, in Bratislava, which I'm looking forward to. And then about 2 days later, I will be doing the same talk at Voxed Vienna in Vienna, unsurprisingly. Okay. And then finally, at the end of March, I'm going to be talking about the Atom Editor at CodeMotion in Tel Aviv, which I'm really looking forward to. And then I have actually quite a few more talks coming up, but I won't go any further than that because you'll probably hear from us before then.
Yeah, I've got a few small talks coming up, but they're only little, so I'll put them in the links.
Okay. And so if you enjoy what we do, please go to gregariousmammal.com/podcast to find previous episodes and show notes. Please find us on YouTube or in the iTunes store and rate or comment. And if you especially like what we do, please go to gregariousmammal.com/support, make a donation or buy some merchandise.
Buy us a coffee.
I'm going to buy us a coffee.
In effect.
Give us a donation that is equivalent to the price of a coffee.
That's what.
And we live in Berlin, so coffee is not that expensive. But please do. I'm actually going to be getting some merchandise made up in some small batches very soon to take to conferences and things. But for now, you can go and have a look. We have quite a nice selection of chinchillas and witty comments. Are you self-employed? I have a great T-shirt that says, "I'm not lazy, I'm self-employed." Surely you want to... I should be wearing it in the video, but I'm not. I'm actually wearing a Telegram T-shirt. So, but for now, this is Chris Chinchilla on Twitter at Chris Chinch, saying thank you for listening and watching, and goodbye. And
Cate Lawrence, that's at Kate_Lawrence.
Kate with a C.
Kate with a C. Lawrence with a W. Saying fare thee well and enjoy the rest of your weekend.